Got it. Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to November 30th Place-Based Learning, TES Learning Series presentation webinar with me, Tyler Breen. I am your host. It is a pleasure to be here and talking about this topic, which is near and dear to my heart. Just a real quick background on where I'm coming from. I am the Place-Based Learning School Support Coordinator with AASB. Got a couple of my colleagues here on the webinar with us. And prior to my position here, I spent about 8 years running immersive student learning trips through Latin America, all based on the premise of place-based learning and connecting learning to place. In just a moment, I'm going to want to get to know a little bit more about y'all. But first, I would like to acknowledge that I specifically live on the unceded territories of the Aquan, what is currently known as Juneau and Douglas, Alaska. I acknowledge that the Tlingit peoples have been stewards of this land since time immemorial, and I'm grateful for that stewardship, care, and knowledge. I recognize a series of unjust actions that attempted to remove them from their land, which includes the forced relocations and burning of their villages. And I honor the relationship that exists between Tlingit peoples, their lands, their ancestors, and future generations. As we aspire to work towards healing and liberation, we recognize our paths are intertwined in the complex histories of colonization in Alaska. We acknowledge that we arrived here by listening to the peoples, elders, and lessons from the past, and that these stories carry us as we weave a healthy future for future generations. That particular land acknowledgement was created in conjunction with Hune Twitchell and Aware for part of their anti-racism dialogues, and I think it's a powerful statement to where I am, and I would also invite anyone else to look up the ancestral lands that they currently reside on. To continue, I would also like to set just a general agreement for our time together. These are derived from the First Alaskans Institute, and they tend to be a strong foundation for us to go forward into conversations that can sometimes be difficult. Number one is that in every chair, there is a leader. We all come to this with different perspectives, different background experiences, and that diversity of perspectives is what makes us stronger. As we speak to be understood, and we listen to understand. We are present and engaged, and these all kind of come into just valuing our time together. You know, what we put into this is what we will get out of it. I also want this to be a safe space for meaningful conversation. This is the place, and it is the perfect place to make some mistakes, especially as we go into place-based education. It's a process, and I've made tons of mistakes in it. I'm sure that we have all had those moments where like, I probably won't do that again. And you know what? Those are those really valuable learning experiences. And this being an area to explore some of that is important. Challenges to solutions. I feel that often as we are presented with difficult histories, difficult topics, it is, a little easier to get caught up in what is preventing us from doing it. And as it's important to understand what prevents us and what barriers might exist, but overcoming those barriers and having the mindset of like, okay, if there is a barrier, it can be overcome. Take us thou hats off. As we go into some of these conversations, I think empathy is a huge portion of what place-based learning is. And so as we go into this conversation, if you are coming in as an administrator, as a counselor, as a teacher, an educator, an after-school program supporter, taking that hat off and saying, okay, how do I get into that perspective of the families and students and community that I'm looking to serve and uphold? So ultimately, we are responsible for our experience. Take care of yourself if you need to step away, and take care of one another. We're here to lift each other's voices up. If I could get a, I don't know, thumbs up or a yeah or a I'm not going to do that, and then we might have to talk about why not. But All right, thank you. Quick little overview of what I had planned. I like to have an agenda that I can deviate from based on how and where the conversation goes, but at least what I figure we have to go on for today. I'm going to open up with just a little question to get to know y'all a little bit more, and then ask about what is place-based learning. It's something that I know has got a lot of different definitions and a lot of different contexts, and so what the operating definition we're going to be working from. I would like to bring in the voice of one of my counterparts, Heather Gakey Powell. I've got a video that I would like to show, and then go into what does it look like if we're going to make the rubber hit the road on this. And that includes, like I said, building empathy and understanding our communities. And then if we have time, we'll go into a little bit of a culture and data discussion, see what the voices of our students and families are telling us in numbers, share out, and then some takeaways and next steps. Any initial questions, concerns? Y'all feeling like the intrepid wanderers and adventurers that I know you are? All right. Then first, Forrest Gump would like to wave at you and welcome you. And to start off, how are you today? And if you are familiar with Zaretta Hammond's representation of the tree, the cultural tree where it's got the leaves and the roots, these are more of those shallow culture questions. But if you've got a greeting in a local language, or I always like to know something about a plant with an interesting use. So I will start us off. Atlin Gunash Chish for coming. My name is Tyler Ayachat Duasak. That is about the extent of my Tlingit so far. So let's get some other voices in the room. How are y'all doing? Who is here?
I'll pipe in. I'm Heather Coulahan, and I'm in Juneau and colleague with Tyler. And I have been seeing salves and things made with Devil's Club. And so I've been, so I bought some and I want to try that out, especially on sore knees, like after hiking. I'm happy to be here.
Thanks for being here and for sharing. Also, that Devil's Club salve works wonders. Anyone else care to introduce themselves?
I'm Pat Sidmore. I'm also in Juneau, and I have used that Devil's Club salve before. And you stole my thunder, and it's wonderful. It actually really helps on my arthritic big toe.
Hi, I'm Vanessa. I'm in Fairbanks, and I can't think of anything cool other than I would like to explore Labrador tea. I've heard it's really good. Haven't really tried it, so. Yeah.
I'll try to remember. There's a cool video that the Hoona Indian Association made that goes into how to identify it, where they collect it, and I'll try to send it over to you. And then Cami, as she put in the chat, if you don't feel comfortable sharing verbally, feel free to put a greeting in the chat. But I tend to like things to be as comfortable and a dialogue as possible. So I'll give a few more moments if anyone else would like to say their name or anything else.
So this is Cami. I can go next. I'm also located here in Juneau, and I feel like everyone's initial thing is the Devil's Club salve. I agree, it works wonders. And then Vanessa, I've actually had Labrador tea, and it was lovely. It was on a really cold, snowy hike in Denali. So it was I think one of the perfect places to experience that for the first time.
Stephanie, I see you put there in the chat. I hope your speaker issues might get resolved, but lovely to have you here. Thanks for sharing. All right. So to open up, I mean, there's the big question about place-based learning. What does it mean to have a connection to place, and why is it important? This is just a question for any initial sense. And I mean, I'll put it out there that part of what we all just shared was a little bit of our connection to place. But when we think about it from an education standpoint, you think about your students. What does it mean for them to have a connection to place? And as educators, as people supporting our students, why is that important? I'm going to give a few moments just to digest, but feel free to unmute, put anything in the chat.
I'll chat. My son goes to a place-based school here in Fairbanks, and it's just really amazing to for him to learn the resources, you know, from minerals and plants and, you know, people who've been on these lands, or the history of gold mining here in the Fairbanks. I learned so much from him just as a parent, and it's so important because he is really looking forward to hiking the Chilkoot Trail now, because he understands that history, or he understands when we go camping, you know, what plants can do what. And it's just really amazing to see that learning and apply it practically in real life too.
Yeah. And what I love about that answer is, I mean, there's so much that Alaska in particular has it as a definition of place. And when we think of, you know, who has been on these lands, you know, there's such a strong connection between place and identity, to a point where Alaska Native culture is tied to place in a way that is like, it can't be unlinked. And so the history of a place and the history of the people and how they got there and what makes up our reality today is all based on that history and that interaction with a place. And I know when I think of what makes it important, like if I'm going to think about how I go about things outside of school, how do I engage with the world, and how do I apply what I've learned in class, or how do I apply something that is from that in-school time? I can do that best if I see that connection. So to me, place has a very broad and directly applicable importance for education.
And I was just going to pipe in. I really connected with what Susan wrote in the chat. She said connection provides a secure and safe place to learn. And I was just thinking about bringing place in, like, accelerates learning, because it's what's shaping the student, because the student is living in that place. And so that just seems like that accelerates learning, because it creates that secure and safe place to learn.
You know, to build off that, I was thinking several years ago, I was in a job interview. I was on the interview team, and the question was kind of this throwaway question, and the answer that everybody was expecting was, I would Google it, right? And you know, if you didn't know something, how do you approach finding out what it was? And the person didn't respond that way. They said instead that when I want to learn something new, I think about something I already know, And then I move out away from that towards that new thing that I want to learn. And I was thinking about that in terms of, you know, when we're little, we're really grounded. I mean, we literally are on the ground, right? And that's exactly how we learn. We start from that very small little world of where we are and go out from there. It was the smartest answer I'd ever heard in an interview. It was amazing.
Yeah, I like that, especially like moving out from what I know, because it's pushing that comfort boundary. And you know, to go on Susan's point of that's what makes it a safe place to learn, especially if you know you're looking at the world around you and you're looking at how you interact with it. And Heather wants to know if that person got the job.
No, but not because of my vote.
But especially like when you think of that safe place to learn, like, yeah, this is a lot of what we're trying to get at as educators is like, how do we prepare students to interact with the world that they experience? And especially, I think, you know, that representation of the world outside of them and where they see themselves in it. So I would like I would like to bring in another voice on what place-based learning is and what it means. This I mentioned is Heather Skakey Powell. She's a culture and language teacher over in Huna, and she has been one of my like awesome go-to friends and contacts over there for her insight. And it is my distinct pleasure to have her as my celebrity feature here. So I'm going to start up and let me know if the audio comes through all right on this. Let's see.
The one thing that if there's no other tie between our teachers and our families, which I don't think that's true, but if there was no other ties and there was only one tie, it's place, right? I mean, like, we're all living in the exact same place. We wake up every morning and the tide's coming in and the tide's going out at the same time. And we're preparing for the weather every morning before we leave the doors, you know, whether it's putting on a pair of flip-flops or wearing our extra tufs. And I can tell you that, you know, through my travels, I've been to a lot of different places. And it was really helpful when somebody kind of gave me a heads up and said, hey, you should bring your rain jacket. They say it's going to be sunny, but just in case. I mean, it made my experience so much more pleasurable to be able to say, wow, look it, in my backpack, I'm hiking, I'm 2 miles out, and I have a rain jacket when it started raining. You know, so just like simple things like that. Why is it so important for our students to be able to connect with place? And why is it so important for our teachers to have the resources to help them do that? You know, I think that one of the things for me is you know a lot about the first 6 weeks of school, right? They start to create routines, expectations, responsibilities, you know, and so students kind of get into that routine and that schedule. And, you know, students that have knowledge on what's expected and what their roles are, those are successful students. And being able to know that my job is this is my task every day or once a week, or our class is responsible for recycling, or, you know, just knowing that those things are coming, it kind of takes away that anxiety of just not knowing what's coming and allows your brain to just be able to say, this is my responsibility, this is my job. And I know that that's really a good thing for me too as an adult. So being able to have a connection to the place that I live is probably one of the most important things that I learned as a young person. And having been raised with grandparents, which is really a lucky thing that not everybody gets the opportunity to have. For me, knowing, you know, the Tlingit name for the islands surrounding me, or listening to my grandfather talk about Dakait, is, Nakwasina is what they call it. But Nakwasina is not a Tlingit word, and knowing the stories that go with those places. I think those things at a very early age kind of gave me the responsibility that those lands had been caretaken by our people for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and that those animals and that those waters, they weren't a possession, they were a responsibility. And I feel like being able to be engaged with our communities and being able to be engaged with our families, it's absolutely, as an educator, our responsibility to know those things, or to be able to learn those things and be given opportunities to learn from our students, which I think is really, really important. So why do we want our children to have a connection? Well, if children know who they are, they're stronger. If children know who they are and what their responsibility is to their lands, they are the teachers. It opens up this place in their mind where they understand that they're just this small piece in all of the machinery of life. And I think that gives them a job. I think that gives them a responsibility. If they know how to count, play, day, nusk, dahun, Heijin, and they in turn get to work with a group of students that knows Tlashtasa, their job is to teach them play, day, nusk, dahun, Heijin. It's not everything. They don't know every number. They don't know infinity. They don't know 3.14. They don't know pi, right? But they know those things. They know what that hand is. And that's their responsibility, right? So once they teach that, it becomes kind of embedded in them, not only in their brain, but in their actual muscle memory of their body. They're able to, when they pull their hands out, you'll find them hard pressed to not be counting in their mind. And that's where our teachers get the benefit of having these young educators underneath of them that know how they're connected to land. And I think that in our homes, a lot of times, it's really important for us to be able to value our students' families. And a lot of times you're going to have students that are going to come and they're going to say, I didn't get my math homework done last night. I apologize. Or just not bring it at all and hope nobody notices, right? And maybe nobody asks them, well, why didn't you bring your math homework in? And maybe it just goes by the wayside. And then the next time lesson 2 comes in, they don't have the skills from lesson 1 to be able to build on lesson 2, right? And so it starts to create this trauma, this internal trauma that this child has. But maybe the question should have been, why didn't you get your homework done? And then you would have seen probably that sparkle that says, my dad went out and set a halibut skate, and my family was up all night processing halibut. And we had to go to my grandma's house, and she made chowder, and my job was to cut potatoes. I cut 15 potatoes into quarters, right? Wow, that child just did math. And I think that even more so, it was that gift of learning, that intent to be able to learn things that are important to their land, things that connect them with their waters. So that's why I feel like students that are better connected to their lands, better connected to their communities, are strong members of society. Those are the people that are going to go and they're going to get their teaching degrees and come home. Those are the people that are going to become strong in tribal government. Those are going to be the people that are coming and rebuilding our clan houses. Those are going to be the people that are teaching people how to harvest and know that that traditional ecological knowledge is valued. If you can be the teacher that values that student, if you can be the teacher that shows that you value that by, going to these community events or being seen, being present, joining A&B or ANS, being a part of after school clubs, going down to the dock and helping somebody, figure out their fishing line that got tangled. Like being those aunties and uncles in those communities, I think are probably the most precious and most meaningful relationships, because it shows that you value not only that individual student, but that family, that community, that culture, and those lands. Chish.
So I always love having Skakey's voice in the room because, I mean, in that 7 minutes, I think that was, I mean, that was a crash course in so many different aspects of place-based learning. Um, but I wanted to just open up the floor to what you've noticed while watching that. What stood out to you from the video, and especially thinking of that impact and that connection to culture, what are the things that affect your students' abilities to connect in the classroom, to you, to other students, and to the content? And I think the first thing that stood out to me this time watching that, because I've watched that a number of times now, but um, the new teachers learning from their students and learning from the community. I think that community connection was huge for me, because I think, especially in a state where so many of our teachers are coming in from the lower 48 and coming into communities that they might be newer to, there is so much to learn about it. And there's an amazing program in Lower Yukon that I'll try and send the video out to everyone here, where they start the school year off with 2 weeks of subsistence activities, and it serves a multiple purpose function where new teachers coming into the community get to meet their students, meet the families, and participate in something that is an integral part of the culture of that community. It provides food for them to get through the winter, and it also then serves as a basis for tons of biology lessons, ecology lessons, math. So there's so much that can uh, like a richness that can come out of that understanding and that culture and that learning from us as like an educator standpoint. What stood out for others?
I'll jump in while others might be gathering thoughts. You know what I liked about it was of her connecting, especially the story of the catching the halibut and having to process it and making chowder, and it, if the teacher asked that question, it would bridge the family life and what happens in the community and the land and the in the area with what's happening in the school. And I've been in schools where the school feels like a spaceship that was dropped into the neighborhood or into the village. And I can't imagine what it's like for a child to try, walk through the door either direction and go into a whole different world. And by bridging that, the opportunities for learning, like she said, cutting up the potatoes are just, are just expanded. And what you described, Tyler, is really cool too, because it gives teachers context and shared experience, right? When we have shared experience, we can build out from what we already know.
Just to build on what Pat was just saying, that stood out to me too, just the way Shkeki phrased it. It's a way to value family. I hadn't thought of it that way, that it really is a way to build relationship with family and to show students in a really tangible way, I value your family's experience and way of being, so much so that this is how we're going to learn.
Yeah. I think that so many of these connections just show how why it's difficult to have one specific definition of what is place-based learning, because it spans so many different things. It is that connection to the families, it's connection to the local history, it's connection to the ecology and resources of a place. So there's a lot that goes into it, which I think leads me to what my next question is here, and why it can be sometimes confusing. Okay, like, then what does it look like to do this? And Pat, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. And Heather, I think, driving home that, like it's that connection to valuing families. What can it look like to get started with place-based learning? And I think a lot of it is that informal time outside of school, um, where we are just having a conversation, you're laughing, you're starting to understand more about the community that you are in, whether it's rural or urban. It's getting a sense for who are the people that make up my classroom. Um, and then, oops, I lost one of my windows. And then why are relationships and empathy, as you were saying, so important to education? Because that is how you create that connection to what they experience on a day-to-day basis. How a student sees themselves using what is going on in the classroom is by applying it to the things that happen in their day-to-day lives that we all learn from getting to know them. So what comes to mind when you think of starting place-based learning? I've got a little list here that it will build out, but I want to know more about, like, when you think of that informal time as an educator or a youth supporting person, how do you get to know a place? What makes you feel a part of that community?
I was gonna go there, Pat. My son's school does this really cool, they do wild and local meals once a month. And there's usually a theme, but families can volunteer and bring something that they've harvested, either over the summer or recently, and everyone brings something and everyone shares and helps prepare together. And it's a really cool experience because I think it gets all the kids talking about what that experience was. So, this we brought shrimp, or we went blueberry picking and made muffins, or somebody brought in halibut or moose, and they get to talk about how that harvesting with their family happened, or just preparing it. Other kids can learn if they've never gone on those experiences. So food for sure.
I think food tends to be a very popular one. One, because it's a major strength. Two, it's about 4 o'clock and we're all getting hungry. But food is one of those ones where it is such an intrinsic tie to where we come from, and especially as we mentioned earlier, like the Labrador tea. The Devil's Club Salve. There's just so many connections that, like, our local ecology, where we are, and how that influences our everyday experience and how we share it. And then building from something strength-based and building those relationships, maybe over something like food, that's when we can start kind of finding, okay, this is where our community is really strong. And what are the community needs? What are the things that, as we're having these conversations, come up and like with the community as, like, okay, well, this is something that we're looking to continue to strengthen our efforts on, something that we know we want to further support. And as far as developing place-based learning tactics, that's when, okay, we now have an understanding of the community, we have an understanding of the strengths and the things that we would like to continue to support and make stronger. That's when we can start using that relationship and that knowledge to co-create a community project. And I've seen this in particular with Heidelberg's high school PBL curriculum, where they go and they'll help repair a dock. And that dock, they have to calculate the angle. They have to calculate the hypotenuse to understand how much wood they need to have to repair that section of the ramp. And so there's an integration of, this is what we want students to know, and this is what we need as a community. How can we merge those two different things to address one another? And students then have a very strong, tangible experience. It's like, oh yeah, like, you want me to know Pythagorean's theorem? I did it to get the hypotenuse on that triangle that when we repaired the dock over there. And oh yeah, I know exactly what tree has the particular wood that is better for being submerged in water. So there's so much that can go into that as well. And then community buy-in. As an educator, if you are looking to do something like this, you'll be able to tell when you've hit on something really useful, because the community will want to do it with you. And I think that doing something collectively, maybe a little outside of the traditional dynamic of a classroom, but it's how we'll make sure that we're doing something that is impactful for a community and impactful for our students. If you have complete community buy-in, and complete community buy-in was, consensus like that is a rare thing, but like getting support is helpful in making sure that our efforts are long lasting and sustainable. And then definitely learning from what you did. How did it go? If you co-create a project and you try it out and it fails fantastically, well, I guarantee you that there was a lot that came out of that that's good, a lot of good learning, and learning for us as educators too on how to do it better. And then continuing to build out relationships so that you can get honest feedback and continue to refine the process. So, I mean, again, this is a very rough outline of what one possible process of PBL can look like as we start. And in some of the future PBL series, we'll go into developing and structuring those conversations. And now we are on time to continue in with this. So I wanted to bring in a little bit of data, throw on my data guy hat for a moment, and bring in some of the school climate and connectedness survey questions. I do have a warning. There are data and figures on the next slide, but we will get through them together. So a little bit of context to what we're looking at here. These on the left-hand side are the responses from the statewide school climate and connectedness survey from 2021. We asked students, staff, and families a broad range of questions, and these are some of the ones that I chose because they kind of get to the heart of how much of a connection to place and culture and that family connection we see. And this is statewide, so we can, if any particular district would like to dive in a little bit more specifically on theirs, you can give us a call at AASB and we can definitely do some of that. But so looking at the question, my school teaches about the history and culture of the people who live in my community. 54% of students said, yes, that I see that. And that's up 3% from the year before. Can I have someone else volunteer to possibly read the next question? And then maybe popcorn around for the last two after that.
My school values the language and culture of my family, and that was 58% responded favorably. And that makes me think of what Susan just wrote in the chat about Yukon Kuskokwim inviting elders into the classroom, because it seems like that could like directly impact that statement right there, or the response to that statement right there.
I was thinking too, I noticed Vanessa wrote about being amazed at the kayaks. Yeah, that's amazing. I was thinking too about Angoon, which has got they're doing a giant canoe. They had a log that's, I don't know how many tons, that they're carving over the winter with STEM students. They've got a master carver and elders and STEM students. And I mean, they're going to end up with a canoe to do harvesting and everything. But I think about all the learning that'll happen during that time too. It's amazing. I wish I had that in my school when I was a kid.
Pat, if I'm not mistaken, I believe they also took a trip to Hawaii to do a cultural exchange with a group of students out there, and they did a comparative. I don't know the specifics, but they were talking about a comparison between the Tlingit canoes and the Polynesian style from Hawaii, and it sounds like just an amazing connection and trip. But all right, well, thank you for joining us, Stephanie. Glad to have you here for the amount of time that you were able to join us. If you do want to connect further, I'll put my email in the chat.
While you're doing that, I'll read the next one. My teachers make an effort to represent my culture in class lessons. 38% responded favorably. And
this is one of those questions where Claudia from AASB as well, and I had an in-service with some teachers over at SHI, and someone said, I find it, they were basically, and I'm paraphrasing, it was daunting to try and represent all cultures because I'm not an expert in all cultures and I don't want to offend a culture by misrepresenting because I don't know. And that gets to a point of place-based education that is, it can be very uncomfortable to not be the expert. But what we can do in recognizing that, we don't have to go out and get a master's degree or a second bachelor's or something like that in Japanese culture and Tlingit anthropology. Oh, and I also need to understand my Filipino students. We won't necessarily be the experts in everything that we want to expose our students to. But what we can do is facilitate experiences that allow them to share from their perspective and their culture, where they have then taken the reins and can say, this is how, from my perspective and my history, how this applies. And so it takes a little bit of that, creative structuring, but, as the facilitators of an experience, rather than necessarily always the expert on a topic, we can bring place in ways that are really valuable, where students are then the drivers of their experience. So let's see. And
I think I can read the last one if we were going there.
Yeah, let's hear that one.
I see my family's culture represented in class lessons, materials, posters, and art around the school. 36% responded favorably.
Thanks, Vanessa. And yeah, I think that, that also, it all gets to the heart of how do we facilitate our students' experience so that they can see themselves represented. And, it shows that we are, between last year and this year in a positive direction, and that we also probably have some room to grow. I suppose before we head on to the last little portion, is there anything else from some of that data that stands out to you? Anything that you were like, like I'm a little surprised that we were at this percentage here, or that question got that response?
Well, I was just thinking about the conversation just now about inviting student voice or asking students, not needing to be an expert, and instead inviting students to be teachers of their own place and culture and community. And I was thinking that seems like that's the very basic starting point for PBL. The slide previous about like what are the starting points kind of described a project starting point to PBL. And it seems like supporting teachers to have those questions that they could be asking could be a very basic starting point, because that was interesting about the data, that students responded more favorably to schools like representing culture and family and community more so than classrooms representing that. So if teachers, educators, school staff, everyone had like those starter questions or starter sentences that would start that conversation, maybe teachers, educators, staff would feel more comfortable if they had that like questions in their pocket they could pull out and be using to start that conversation.
Yeah. And, perhaps that might be a plug for some of the next in the PBL series on how those conversations might get started. I also do think it's interesting in noting where students might feel more connected to place and culture. Obviously, it's going to be potentially different for each community, and that's why I said, like we can do SCCS for different districts if they want to dive in. But I've tended to see that there might be a difference between where parents say they're connected and families say they're connected and where students do. And, that might be based on, the family's experience with the schools and what they tend to hear versus what the students experience on a day-to-day basis when they go into the school. And then from a student perspective, the way that I see my school versus my relationship with my individual teacher might affect how and where I feel connected to place. So there's a lot.
Tyler, I was thinking, as you know, I used to spend a lot of time with that survey. And there's another question on there that I just love. And it is I'll paraphrase it, but it's basically, this school is a welcoming place for families like mine. And I think that's just a really interesting question, because I think it gets to culture in such an interesting way. And again, bridges that gap to some of our earlier conversations too. And now I'm going to read what Susan just wrote in the chat.
See, curriculum and instruction training, how to modify textbook resources, and how to teach standards in a place-based way. Also need much more how we run our day and teach. Less lecture, more classroom storytelling is an oversimplified way to put it. Well, exactly. I mean, and that's, there's an inherent tension in trying to assess from a place-based perspective. There is a bit of like a push and pull in how, when we create standards based on culture and trying to assess a student's connection and ability to engage in the world around them. There might be some pushback that you get on how do you test students on that? How do you grade them on it? And whether or not that's an appropriate thing to do. And I think that's where those conversations need to bridge the difference between our admin, the multiple levels of like admin and school boards and the community to find what that appropriate medium is. But it's a great point, and it's, one that as a state, I think we are continually looking at and continually adjusting to. And then drawing from your experience and what we've done today, what does our conversation kind of say about how we make sure students are feeling connected?
So can I just add something quick?
Sure thing.
So I think a lot of what we don't do. So I spent a lot of time in upstate New York, and my husband is Onondaga. And so bringing that into where I am and the St. Lawrence Island Yupik culture here, a lot happens where if a student is not connected to the past and has a reason, like, how am I going to use this in the future? How is this all, that time continuum connected? So talking to them about, there's a really interesting article about how, oversimplified again, it talks about how all math came from Native American cultures. And it's really interesting. And if you talk about that with kids, they're like, oh, so this is mine. So now I have a reason. And then we talk about how you might be building something and you're using math in that building, and you're using math when you're hunting, and how, we're doing a whole math lesson here with kids about the length and weight of their fishing lines and things like that. So all of those connections from past to present to how am I going to use this and how is this mine is so super important for kids.
Yeah, I appreciate that. How is this mine? And especially when we have, very, very diverse, Alaska's got a huge diversity of districts and students. And so how do you make something individually yours to every student? And that can be a struggle. And so I think, yeah, it's how does that conversation get structured into a way where students are, again, the ones saying, this is how it's applied to me. Because I do think that while there is incredible value to taking some of those superficial cultural links and embedding them into what we're teaching, it's a portion of getting that connection, but it's getting that full ownership is a much deeper level of connection, as you're saying, like, that it's mine.
Susan, when you said that, and mine, identity is, another word for that. I identify with this, and I know in January 20th we're going to have a session with some of Tyler's colleagues and about that topic as it relates to transitioning into adulthood from schools. And that it really, what they're going to talk about, I mean, we got a precursor on it, was what they're going to talk about is identity of them seeing themselves in the world in multiple ways, right? So they don't shut off from possibilities. And so, man, it just really weaves in with this, I think. What you said just makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah.
Like, we just get stuck in, it's easy to research and find and I'll call it a textbook resource on purpose, because textbooks are not the curriculum. So it's easy to, oh, we've adopted this textbook and it's really great and it's wonderful and it does cover a lot of the Alaska standards and things like that. But then we tell teachers, but we don't help them make it so that, how can we substitute stories? How can we make sure that this, yes, we need to learn to read, and we have a research-based way to teach kids to read, but what they're reading, can they see themselves in the stories? Can they, relate at all? And it's, even when social emotional learning, when we use second step, they have diversified it quite a bit in this latest rendition, so that there are some students of color in the pictures that are there. But do our kids necessarily see themselves fully in that when we're teaching that, we have to do those modifications, and you have to know enough to craft that. And hopefully the way you're knowing enough is by saying, hey kids, does this look like you? What would you want to see? What could we, and ask the kids, let them create their own school in their own classroom. They're really good at it.
I absolutely love that last portion. I mean, like really getting that, like asking students, that has been a huge component of, you know, we're also working on some youth leadership programming here at AASB. And one of the things that we've heard from across the state, you know, a lot of schools, like education nonprofits, after school programs, they all like, we want student input. We need student input. And a lot of them are struggling to get it because, you know, yeah, they're trying to look for it in places outside of school and students are stretched thin. But if you can embed that input into the classroom, if you can ask them and allow them, as you said, to create their classroom because they're good at it, it's such a positive feedback loop because then they're engaged and then they're interested and then they want to do a little bit more. And so that, I think that's how you'll know you've got that momentum in rooting education in place and their experience. Which
Well, if we could go all radical, I'd love to have parents and students required to have a voice whenever we build a new school or remodel or add on to a new school. That would be wonderful. Like what furniture, what colors, what shape, because when you said schools are like a spaceship, literally come visit me on St. Lawrence Island. I will show you Savunga School. We are a spaceship. So yeah, and the locals will tell you it was built in the wrong direction because nobody would listen. So that's why our entire front entrance gets covered in snow and we can't use it half the year. So yeah, let's write that into Alaska law that parents and families must have a voice at the table whenever we do those things.
I am so glad that we have that recorded because I think, you know, as you said, let's get radical. I think that's common sense. That is it, and common sense shouldn't be a radical prospect, but sometimes it can be. And I appreciate you bringing that to the table. Seeing that it is 4:30, we are coming up on time here. I wanted to say an Atlungunas Chish, how in Deutschen. I will keep the Zoom open for a moment if we want to keep talking a little bit, but I also wanted to give my contact information if you would like to have some further conversations on what it looks like and what it should look like to have education rooted in place. So thank you so much.
We did some redo. When I arrived this year, basically I took the front entryway off and everybody, what are you doing? What are you doing? Because there was this walkway and rails that just acted as a snow catch, and it would help the drift just build up. So we're seeing if that redo will help at all. But yeah, the angle of the school, the locals said when they were building it, they said, we told them that's where the wind's going to collect the snow. We told them not to do it like that. And it literally, like, you can't see in here, but my walls are crooked and all of the, so it's like a boat out on the outer walls, and on the outer wall there's your window. Well, the window opens in and the wall is tipped. Do you think that window is ever going to stay open? Let fresh air in here? No, because it just slams back closed. So yeah, it's a very interesting building, and it has carpet on the walls of the hallways, and it's prickly. It hurts if you touch it. It will prick you. It's like cactus or something along the hallway walls. You got to come see it. But yeah, I would love to do my PhD around how to design schools, and really for I have a child with autism, So children of various cultures and children of autism and other things. Schools in general worldwide are just not built for conducive comfort, and all day long in little tiny hard plastic chairs is not good for anyone. So I would love to design just the materials we use and the comfort level, and it's my dream someday. But yeah, come to Savunga and check us out. I've got to run off and call a counselor. So thank you guys. Lots of energy at the end of the day.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Susan. All right.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, Tyler.
I'll get a couple more of those going for, I think February is my next one with PBL.
Okay. Yeah, we're gonna start putting out just getting them some flyers together and start to do some promotion for next year. We're gonna meet next week, I think.